Jackman has played Wolverine for 26 years. That is to say that we've had 26 years of Wolverine, and throughout that entire time, despite being one of the most well-loved and well-respected adaptations of the character, he never once wore his super suit. Not until 2024, 24 years into his run. And yet, people still respect him. Despite not having some of the major trappings of what a character like Wolverine should have, people still respected him. People still looked at him as one of the best versions of the character that's ever been put to film. Some people say even the definitive version of the character. And yet, again, he didn't have the suit. The reason for this, I think, is that the writers of Wolverine understood something about the character that most people who do adaptations don't understand. And that is that they managed to capture the soul of the character, the true essence of what the character is actually supposed to be. And in doing so, the trappings became less important. They're not unimportant necessarily. We all couldn't wait for the scene when we actually saw Wolverine in his full suit, comic accurate mask and all, but it doesn't change the fact that even without it, he was still Wolverine. He wasn't short like Wolverine, he wasn't even Canadian, and yet he still counted, because again, they understood the soul of the character. That's a very important part when it comes to any single character, when it comes to adapting that character in general. Oftentimes, you can have the trappings. I've talked about this with James Gunn's Superman. You have the trappings of Superman, as far as you have the suit itself, you have the general world around him in many different ways. You even casted some of the people in his world pretty well. Despite that, you didn't have the soul of what Superman actually was. You didn't understand the pure essence of the character, and thus the character, of course, in my opinion at least, fell flat in the minds of many different people as well. Now, there's one character I want to go over the soul of for this video specifically, is the character of Thor. Because Thor is a character that oftentimes gets misconstrued and misunderstood. It also happens, the fact is that he is my favorite character of all characters in fiction. And ultimately speaking, when it comes to understanding the soul of what Thor is, it can become a very difficult task, because unfortunately there's been so many different writers for the character, so many different ideas that the character has, that it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what makes the character that character. After all, how do you know you're actually pinpointing that idea of what the character should be, not just pinpointing what you personally want the character to be? Well, I think I have a method for that. And the method that I use is first and foremost to look at the original writer, the original creator of the character, and look at the way that they wrote that character first and foremost. Look at the way the character acted, look at the way the characters around them acted, look at the definitive version, the original version of the character. And then when it comes to the other writers who have taken the character up since then, look at versions of the character that actually either fit the original vision or build upon the original vision. That is to say, a lot of characters don't do that. A lot of versions of the character don't do that. For example, one version of the character that I think is completely destructive to the overall idea of Thor is not James Gunn, sorry, but Jason Aaron's version of the character that he portrayed throughout his run. One of the major ideas is that he has completely destroyed the idea of Mjolnir. Instead of Mjolnir being this powerful hammer given to Thor at his birthday by his father, instead of doing that, it was instead a prison for this creature that he created called the Mother Storm, which Odin imprisoned into there. And then on top of that, he didn't even give this hammer to Thor. Instead, Thor basically took it for himself. On top of this crazy idea, Odin didn't even put on the Worthiness enchantment on Mjolnir. Instead, the Worthiness enchantment was simply the Mother Storm deciding who was worthy based on some arbitrary idea of who the Mother Storm thought was worthy. That, as you can probably tell, is a completely opposite and just opposed to the original vision that Stan Lee had for the character. And as a result, I think that you can't really use that idea at all if you want to go to what the true essence of what Thor is. And that's very important, because Thor's essence is irrevocably tied to Mjolnir in of itself. because the Mjolnir and the Worthiness enchantment are the most famous parts of Thor, and they're the biggest parts of his character. You see, Thor's can be split into two different ideas: pre-worthy Thor and post-worthy Thor. When you look at the pre-worthy Thor, this is the problem that most people run into. They look at that version as the main version of Thor, even though post-worthy Thor is much more important. Pre-worthy Thor is based upon the actual setting and the idea of the character, which is this young Viking prince who's always been the strongest person in every room, given a weapon that makes him even more powerful, and of course just sending him out there. And from there you can understand that this is going to be a character that's going to have a huge amount of problems. Of course, one thing that Stan Lee added in there is he added in the medieval sense of everything that Thor did. So Thor still had an idea of honor, Thor still had an idea of duty, and as a result, even though young Thor or pre-worthy Thor was still a heroic person in many ways, he had many heroic traits, he was very brave, he still cared for the innocent people for the most part within most adaptations in the early version of the character. He still wanted to do great and powerful things for the most part. He didn't want to necessarily hurt the innocent. In fact, he wanted to defend the innocent. It didn't change the fact that Thor was still very arrogant in the way he did things. He didn't think first. He was very impulsive in the way he did things. And as a result, he was prone to creating bigger problems despite having solid good intentions. And thus, through learning humility and in of itself empathy through, being banished from the Golden Realm, Thor eventually became a much better character. When he becomes worthy, he has humility, he has empathy for the weaker beings than himself, and he takes basically all the heroic traits he had before, along with adding these last two heroic traits, empathy and humility, and becomes a paragon of virtue, meaning just like Superman, just like All Might, he is now a character that truly deserves the title of being the best of the best. He is a character that inspires everyone else to be just like him. That's the whole point of the Worthiness enchantment on Mjolnir. So on lifting that hammer, it means that they are essentially the best of the best, the closest they can ever get to being a divine being and a divine morality. And this is, of course, very important and a part of the character they unfortunately typically move away from. You see this in Endgame, where Thor summons Mjolnir back to his hand inside of that flashback situation they were in, that time traveling situation they were in. The idea of Thor lifting Mjolnir despite everything within the movie was meant to show that he was still worthy, but worthy in a different way. It was worthy in a new sense rather than the old sense. The old sense of being worthy that Thor and Stan Lee really started out with is this idea that you have to do something to be worthy. You have to have a mindset to be worthy. While this one was more of the classic idea of you're just as good as you are, rather than it being anything actually you have to do to be worthy. It's just like you are always worthy. A weird choice. Again, if that was true, anyone should be able to lift the hammer. It makes no sense. Rather than it being a morality standard, what it should be so that only specific people who meet a certain level of morality can lift the hammer. This also, of course, goes to the character of Odin as well, because Odin has often been destroyed in many different ways when it comes to his morality, and that's been true of the comics, it's been true of the movies specifically. They really destroyed him, made him out to be this terrible person, but the idea really doesn't really fully make sense when you think about the idea of worthiness enchantment. Odin's the one to put the worthiness enchantment on Mjolnir, which means that Odin knows what being worthy is, and Odin usually, within the original version, was always worthy himself. And thus, Odin is supposed to be just the wise father figure to Thor. He is Thor's father. He's supposed to be the wise figure, the person who already has it figured out, the hero that's already reached the end of his journey. That may not be true within mythology, but it's true within at least the version of Odin that Stan Lee wrote. I think that's very important. So as these different elements of the character have been destroyed, I think many people can understand why Thor doesn't feel like Thor anymore. Even the Infinity War version, despite the fact that he is the most closest we've seen to it in a long time, he still isn't what truly Thor is supposed to be. A combination of this powerful medieval warrior, this powerful medieval king, all put together into one great powerful bunch of a paragon of virtue, so to speak. That is to say that, again, unfortunately, thanks to the destruction of Washington in the MCU, I don't think it's possible to bring Thor's soul fully back, because it's already been damaged to a certain extent, but at the very least they can bring enough of it back to try to make the character worth it, or enough like the original soul idea of the character that they can get people to watch it. I mean, I'll still watch, for example, when it comes to certain versions of the character. But if I were to select a single character that actually, a single adaptation, I should say, that actually embodies what Thor's supposed to be, it would probably be the Earth's Mightiest Heroes adaptation in the Avengers show. That was probably the best adaptation of what Thor actually is, where he is humble, he is powerful, he is strong, he has the certain grace, a certain decorum to him. Remember, he was a Viking prince, not just a Viking prince, which means that he would have a certain level of decorum, a certain level of grace, a certain level of majesty, a certain level of gravitas to him. In that show, they did a good job of actually portraying all of those things, sticking closer to Stan Lee's original vision than the MCU unfortunately ever was able to do. But that's just my thoughts on the video. What are your guys' thoughts on the video? Do you believe there's any parts that I missed that should be added to Thor's idea of his character? Do you think there's any parts that should be taken out of that? Do you disagree or agree? All that YouTube jazz. Like, subscribe, do everything you can on that. Hype the video up. That's a new idea. Hype the video up, and so on and so forth. And I'll see you guys in the video. Until then, stay ferocious and vigilant, Knights of Brimstone.